Rebbe was able to be saved from Poland. In a nutshell, because we have to go, everything has to go quick tonight. Or you're staying till as long as I'm here, right?
Waiting for the snow to stop.
Waiting for the snow to stop. Okay. L'chaim.
Works.
Continue. So what happens is, the Chassidim in America go to the government and they say, we need you to reach out to the Germans to allow the Previous Rebbe to get out. The Germans just invaded Poland, and now we're going to the Germans to ask them to allow a rabbi with his family to go out. How do you get to them? So this started a very long process. They hired a lawyer who was a very successful lobbyist in Washington. His name was Max Rode. Nice Jewish boy. And he had connections with some of the people in the administration at that time. One of them was a Benjamin Cohen, quite an influential activist himself and a Jewish person. And there were some Jewish people in the government. There was Robert Wagner, there was Saul Bloom, there was this senator from Idaho that we mentioned earlier. And it started a whole process by which everybody who knew someone was putting pressure in any way that they can. The Rabinowitzes came from Massachusetts, and they went down to speak to whoever they knew. They tried getting to Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis. Brandeis was Jewish. He had known about the Previous Rebbe already from the 1927 saga. And everybody was pressing any button that they can. What turns out is as follows. The SS and the Gestapo, there was nobody to talk to. The Abwehr, which was the
Navy.
Not the Navy, but more like the intelligence of the German army, was being run by Admiral Wilhelm Canaris. And Canaris did not necessarily see eye to eye with the SS, with Hitler, Yimach Shemot. Certainly not on that level of total extermination. So he was a little bit more easier to approach to see if possibly he could facilitate something like this of getting out the Previous Rebbe. How do you get to him? So there's a long story. It turns out that there was, by the Evian conference, there were people from the American government that were there that met him, including a Helmuth Wolfat, a Robert Geist. Names don't really mean anything, but bottom line is there were people in the American government who had a connection to Canaris's administration that had the ability of connecting with him to ask him if he could possibly facilitate something like this. And that's what ultimately happened. The American government and the president did not want to show that they were involved in the war at that time, and they certainly didn't want to show any anti-Semitism. So they figured this is a good way to show the Jewish community that we're going to throw them a bone, we're going to help the rabbi get out, and it's going to show that we're impartial. Even though already at that time, the visa quotas were sharply cut, and it was tsaris to try to get into America. And it got even worse in the next half a year after that, as we all know. So ultimately, this gets to Canaris, and Canaris likes the idea, and he says he has somebody in his administration who's very smart, and it happens to be that his father's Jewish. His name is Major Ernst Bloch, a military man all his life. He was already injured already in World War I. He got certain medals. Very, very loyal and professional military man. And he's going to discuss it with him. And he called in this Ernst Bloch, and Ernst Bloch says to him he feels a connection to Jews. He even speaks Yiddish because his father spoke Yiddish and his grandparents spoke Yiddish, and he's ready to take on the mission with a couple of his people, a couple of his underlings. You just have to tell us what to do. So Canaris says, listen, Warsaw's in shambles. You can't even drive through the streets because there's dead horses and dead people and exploded buildings. I don't know where he is. Do what you can. Look for somebody that looks like Moses, like Moshe Rabbeinu, and free him and take his family out. Where do you start? So this starts a flurry of activity back and forth with the Chassidim in America who are trying to get through to find out where the Previous Rebbe is. There's no connection with Warsaw. What happened was that the Previous Rebbe is already half paralyzed and he can't even walk, so he's being pushed with a wheelchair. And every time he comes to a building and he thinks that it's safe to go down into the basement to be protected from the explosions, boom, he has to move to another building because that building falls down. Literally escaping death by the skin of his teeth. So he goes from one apartment, and they telegram to Riga, to Chaim Lieberman, who was able to escape right away from Zaklikovsky, ran to Riga, and he's connecting with the Chassidim in America, and the Chassidim in America are connecting with Washington, and Washington is connecting with Canaris. They go to the place, he's not there, the building doesn't stand anymore. Bonifastorska 29, there's no such thing anymore. So they finally find a different address where he went to. They send him that address also the building was attacked. He goes to a third address. At a certain point, they write back a telegram. They think that it's over. That the Previous Rebbe was killed in a bombing. Finished. You imagine the Chassidim in America, they're helpless, and they get such a telegram, we don't know what's going on. Long story short, it took a few weeks, from September 1st until before Hanukkah. There's a lot of stories of the Previous Rebbe, how he goes through Tishrei. It's a whole farbrengen in itself. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, they ran from safe home to safe home, and the Rebbe's mother was there. Rebbe Tzishter Nesara. It was a mess. The Tmimim, the Bachrim from Atvatsk all ran. Previous Rebbe told them to all go home to their parents. He didn't want to have the responsibility. Some of them didn't have parents to go home to. They wanted to stay with the Previous Rebbe. So they were literally running from building to building together with him. Came Sukkot. He says we have to build a sukkah. Nobody was building a sukkah. The Previous Rebbe said that anybody that helps build the sukkah, he promises him a bracha of arichas yonim. And they built the sukkah under the bombings. Imagine, sakonas nefashos. Rabbi Weinberg talks about it. He was one of those bachrim. He was carrying the suitcases of the ksavim and the Baal Shem Tov Siddur for the Previous Rebbe when he was running from one place to the other, because he decided he doesn't want to go home to his parents. He's from Poland, and he describes the Previous Rebbe's crying on Yom Kippur and then sukkahs. It's amazing stories. I mean, just to understand a little bit of what this man went through and whose yahrzeit it is today. They finally meet up with him, and they knock on the door. He doesn't want to open the door. The Rashag, who's together with the Previous Rebbe, says, the Germans are here to arrest us. We're not opening the door. It's all over. The door gets busted open, finished. So they go back to the office, and the officers go back again and break the door down if they have to. They didn't want to scare them. They had to break the door down. And they said, we're here to save you. They couldn't believe it. It didn't make sense. Who's being saved by the Germans, by a German officer? The whole thing didn't make sense. They couldn't tell them that we're coming from so and so and so. Everything was confidential. So it took a few hours till they gained the trust of the family of the Previous Rebbe to understand that we're actually here to save you. Previous Rebbe said he doesn't want to go. Why not? All the Klal Yisrael is in danger. I'm going to go to be freed. Imi anochi b'tzara, he said. Wherever the Klal Yisrael is, that's where I'm going to be. Whatever their fate is going to be, that's what my fate is going to be. And it took a few weeks until he finally decided to acquiesce, to go. And imagine the operation of carting off a whole family in the middle of Warsaw to drive them, Germans led, out of Warsaw all the way to the border and then into Germany, into Berlin. Long story short, they loaded them onto the back of a military truck, all standing in the truck. He took his suitcases again with the ksavim, with the talis and film, whatever he was able to. I think the talis and film actually he lost. And they started to drive. And basically, Ernst Bloch was the one that was communicating with whoever the checkpoints were, and he was communicating with the Previous Rebbe because he spoke Yiddish. He kept on telling them, don't worry, Daigenish, don't be afraid. Kept on telling the checkpoints, he has special orders from the German army to take them for questioning to Berlin and then to execute them. So right now we need to take them out. And checkpoint after checkpoint after checkpoint. One of the people in the family who lived not far from here, I don't want to mention him by name, describes the fear and the trepidation every time they came to a checkpoint, because they literally thought, this time it's over. You know, how many checkpoints can you get through before the guy says, I've had enough of you, tak, tak, boom, 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 and it's over. And literally every one is a whole Iber Lebenish, a whole, and finally another miracle, we passed. And they finally come to the Yiddish Gemeinde in Berlin, and and they give them a place to stay there. And Bloch says to them that the next morning we're going to go to the train, and we're going to take you to the Latvian border. Now nobody is using trains. The war broke out. The trains are completely overhauled by soldiers, by military equipment. The Germans are running the show. There's no civilians traveling anywhere. So where do all of a sudden a rabbi with a family traveling on a train in first class? So they kept being asked again. And again, Block has to give this whole story. Finally, they get to the Latvian border. He says goodbye to them, and they go off to Riga, and they're met by Mordechai Dubin. And now starts a 3-month process of trying to get a visa from America to be able to get them to America. But at least they were saved. Interesting that the day that they came to Riga was Hey Tevis, 1940. Long story short, after this few months process of a whole back and forth with affidavits, people had to sign in America that they're going to undertake to support the movement, that they're going to pay for the Frierdiker Rebbe's expenses, the relocation. That was a normal thing to do. The Frierdiker Rebbe had created an organization called Agudas Chassidei Chabad, to be like a non-for-profit umbrella organization for Chabad, and they were the ones that were facilitating this thing. So only now did the Hasidim realize why the Frierdiker Rebbe had asked to create this in 1925, because this was like the vehicle that, number one, showed the governments that there's an entity that has support, that has an infrastructure. There were 200 Nusachari shuls throughout the country at that time. Small little shtiblach, but still it was something to reckon with. And that there's an organization behind it that has funds, that has supporters, that has an incorporated charter, etc., etc. And all these documents are printed in this Inferno book. So they ultimately gave the visas, and at the end of March, they get on a plane from Riga, Latvia, to Stockholm. From Stockholm, they go to Gothenburg, and in Gothenburg, at the pier, they get onto a ship called the SS Drottningholm, which takes a 13-day journey from Sweden to New York. On the 9th day of Adar Sheni of that year, the Frierdiker Rebbe docks, and there's thousands of people gathered at the pier to lay eyes on this man that literally defied the odds, who stood up to the communists, stood up to the Russians, was able to get through the Nazi invasion of Poland, and now is coming in a wheelchair, literally with almost no koiches left, completely battered, tortured, beaten physically, noch emotionally. To what? To start a new life here in America. So there was a very, very big celebration of Baruch Haba, and the Frierdiker Rebbe right away said, this was his first words: Hashem didn't save me to come to this country so I could relax and take it easy from all of the suffering that I went through. Hashem brought me to this country with a shlichus nafshis, a soul mission. At 60 years old, wheelchair bound, to make America a makom Torah, and to be able to help our brothers and sisters who were left behind from here. And obviously this was a tremendous message of hope. Literally at the outburst of World War II, people had no clue what was going on. Of course, it was before we even had an inkling of what the concentration camps would bring. But this level of fierceness, of strength, of courage, what it did to the Jews in America, they never heard anything like this before. The Frierdiker Rebbe went to the Greystone Hotel in Manhattan. And he called a meeting of these few Chassidim, Rabbi Jacobson, Rabbi Simpson, Rabbi Kazanovsky, and their supporters, the Balabatim, that had money. And he tells them that he wants to start a yeshiva here. Yeshiva Stem Chitmim, exactly the way it was in Lubavitch, is now going to be transplanted here. And he laid out his plans. We're going to have a place, and we're going to send out people, and we're going to bring Torah, true Yiddishkeit to America, not compromised like the other movements. Frierdiker writes in his diary that night after they left, he started to say Kriyish Mishalamita, and he broke down crying. And he couldn't stop his crying, and he's thinking to himself, how could it be? What happened was, the supporters of Chabad told the Frierdiker Rebbe, Rabbi, we love you, we respect you, but please excuse us, it's not going to happen here in America. It can't be done. This is not the shtetl. We don't want you to fall flat on your face. It's going to be a catastrophe. Please, for the kavod of your father and your grandfather and all the Chabad leaders before you. Let's not attempt something that we know is going to fail. And the Previous Rebbe is saying to himself, writing to himself, he says, how could it be that they should even think such a thing? His first few hours in America, on American soil. And he says to himself, no, we are not going to let the enemy of Hashem. And they are telling me that America is different. America is not the shtetl. And I'm going to tell them, America is not different. America is nicht anders. And exactly the Yiddishkeit and the connection that a Yid has to Hashem in Russia, he can have the same connection to Hashem here. There's no difference. The Jew is the same, Hashem is the same. It's just that the geographic location is different. There's no such thing. It doesn't separate. And the next day he opens a yeshiva, and these boys that were sent to Tzvatz, that came back literally, that's itself a whole story, how they came back miraculously without their parents committing suicide. And one of them was Matloltai, like you mentioned, my wife's grandfather. The next day in Rabbi Jacobson's shul on Stone Avenue opened up the first yeshivas Temchetvim Lubavitch in America. So obviously the Previous Rebbe was up to something here. And once again, like we mentioned before, this concept of relocation. Relocation. So here's again the Mesiras Nefesh, and this culminates the second decade of the Previous Rebbe's Nesias, with again total Mesiras Nefesh and recreating himself in a way that is absolutely inspiring and legendary. L'chaim, l'chaim.